So,
Do some,
we're live now and saying that we're basically heretics, and
well, do some people actually tune in and follow you, or like?
yeah. So here we are. We're live, and people are watching us babble and wondering if we're actually going to talk about what we said we were going to talk about.
Okay,
You got it?
All right, what are we going to talk about?
Okay. Well,
Honor, Phil. I'm always honored to be included in your life and your thinking and your adventure.
Trouble.
You know who's I just realized is living nearby. I met for the first time when we came out there to your event in Salem, whenever it was, is Jay Baker, who's actually living in Seattle.
Yeah.
All right.
So, have you had a chance to see Jay?
I'm going to see him sometime.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to see him again. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
So yeah. So anyway, some people have jumped on, and welcome to the Wild Theology podcast. I am Phil Wyman, and today we're going to talk with this guy on the screen. One screen is above me, and on the other screen, he's who knows which way it is. These things go all backwards, but that's Jim Henderson. He runs something called Off the Map, which has to do with Christians doing things a little bit differently than they've traditionally done it. And Jim has some concerns about the term "the Great Commission."
About that.
So we've been talking about that on and off, and so can I give a precursor to some of this? So I've done a number of these things just recently because I'm trying to outline evangelistic techniques and influences and influencers primarily through the 20th century, but then there's precursors to that, things that came that influenced the 20th century even to today, and kind of discover what it's done, what has that influence of evangelistic techniques and influencers done to the culture of evangelicalism. Obviously, evangelicalism, the DNA of it has this dynamic of evangelism, right? It's in the name, it's in the DNA of our culture. And so we looked at the altar call, where it came from, and discovered that it's actually pretty new. Early 1800s, before it really gets rolling, and we have this thing we call the altar call, and it's not actually called the altar call till much later, but coming forward in a message to receive the Lord is not an ancient tradition. It's pretty new, a couple hundred years. And then we looked at the sinner's prayer, and that was even newer, 1950s, before it became a standardized thing. So now we're looking at the Great Commission. And so I call Jim whenever I have these questions about evangelism. He's been a guy who's challenging some of the thoughts of current evangelistic practices and trying to make Christians be a little more normal. and I've always appreciated his thoughts. So when he said to me, I've got some concerns about the term, the Great Commission, I was like, oh boy, we're going to barbecue some holy cow with this. So, Great Commission. So this is an interesting thing. Only about 17% of the people in a recent survey who were evangelical Christians, or Christians, it may have been broader, both knew the term and understood what it was. So that, currently where it's at. at least according to that survey. Who knows the accuracy of surveys these days? But so the Great Commission, it is it's this call to go out and preach the gospel in all nations, baptizing people, making disciples. You have a problem with it? That?
You might inform people that there is no such thing as the Great Commission in the Bible, meaning it's a gloss or it's a slogan,
Right.
a marketing title. It's a
Yeah.
that was somebody invented. We're still trying to figure that out.
Right.
And then was inserted and under probably generally under Matthew 28. It's because, and so all of us presume the existence of this narrative attached to that language. So I have no problem with the ideas that we attach to it, but it's just the meaning. It's very powerful because, just for example, I want to say in the late 70s, as recently as the late 18th century, mid 18th century, if you opened a Bible and you were in England and you opened to Genesis chapter 1, there would be a notation there under the title of Genesis saying the earth, it informs you that the earth is 4,000 years old. They put that in there because a guy named Bishop Ussher decided it was important for understand how old the earth was. Now, that still seems like a long time to me, right? Like I could easily be accused of being a young earth person if I didn't know anything and you just said, isn't 6,000 years a long time? I'd say, that sounds like a long time. So, but at that point, people just took it for granted that that's how old the earth was. The problem with that, of course, is that now that's not demonstrably scientifically can't be true. I don't know how old the earth is, but it's certainly older than that. And what it meant was people had somewhat of an imagination saying, oh yeah, I get it. And then there was this logic that followed of Genesis 1, 7 days, 24-hour days, the whole thing, which I want to be very clear here that, while I am a major critic of these propositions, I am very quick to acknowledge that people were living in a certain context that made sense to them. These ideas didn't come out of nowhere. They emerged out of a context. Bishop Ussher had a context. They were, and then the Great Commission has a context whenever it was started. In closing, I want to say on this particular part, people then we make assumptions and we're trying to make sense out of an unknown world. I mean, if you even today walk outside, look at the sky, and think about this. Okay, this is how much you don't know. You're spinning on a globe very rapidly. Okay, let's say 25,000 miles an hour. I don't know what it is, but very rapidly, so fast as to make it look like it's standing still. And you are not flying off the face of this earth because of this thing that we have come to call gravity. Now, and we think gravity is like a huge magnet in the earth holding us down because that's how lame we are, in terms of our knowledge. It operates somewhere on electromagnetic waves. All this is happening, and we just saunter around, get in our cars, drive to, get a hot dog, come back, watch TV, and go through our life. So I'm not trying to tell anybody, I'm just saying there's a lot that we don't know still. So these people were coming out of context. So I approach this with humility. With that, but there are always these unintended consequences that then the next group of people inherit, which is where you and I find ourselves, Phil.
Sure. Yeah. So, I hadn't thought about a challenge, as it were, to the term, the Great Commission, until a few weeks ago when you and I were talking about it. And I know on and off you'd mentioned, hey, where does that term come from? Not so much in the initiation of the phrase, but more in where did its popularity rise from? I know that oftentimes is your concern. What made it common stock in Christian circles? So, I started digging in. There's Baron Justinian von Welz, who supposedly is one of the guys that people say, oh, he came up with the term, but they're not really sure. And then that book that I found from the 1840s,
Right.
some
book.
yeah,
as hell.
It's oh my gosh, isn't it? the introduction to that thing.
They were so racist they didn't even know they were, so they just admitted it.
In that introduction, I'm just going, what the heck? Yeah, and of course that's the 1840s. It's I think the copy that we have was published someplace like Kentucky in the 1890s, but it was originally published in the 1840s in Scotland, and there was a it was like a prize given for the best paper on the subject of evangelization.
Right.
And this one was entitled The Great Commission, and then it had its long subtitle. I think I have it here somewhere in front of me. So that they asked for essays, and there was going to be a prize money given for that, on the duty, privilege, and encouragement of Christians to send the gospel of salvation to the unenlightened nations of the earth. And so Reverend John Harris, he had the winning essay, which is a massive tome. It's just a really big book. Yes. The Great Commission, or the Christian Church constituted and charged to convey the gospel to the world.
Right.
So that's and I, as I think I mentioned this or sent the statistics to you as well. But when you go on the Google map that shows you terms used in publications over history, there was a peak right at the time of the exact words, the Great Commission, and particularly with the words great and commission capitalized. There was a peak in the usage of that in publications it was like 1841 through 1842 or 3. That seems to coincide with the publication of this book, and it was the way it was described as a group from the Scottish establishment. Otherwise, some Christians with a lot of money said, "Let's put on this promotion and let's get a book out there." And then that book was regularly published for almost 100 years. So it seems to be an influence, but that may be somewhat coincidental to its usage. And the thing that I was curious about in that is that oftentimes Hudson Taylor is looked at as a primary voice. He was like 10 years old or less at the time that this was published. And
what about William Carey? Where was he? He preceded all this? Was he preceding this?
I don't know.
Because he's usually given credit for,
right.
I mean, people that don't want to look into this too deeply just throw William Carey in there because he was the first guy.
Okay.
He gets blamed with becoming the idea of international missions. It became a thing during his life. I want to say he was in the 1840s, but
he died in 1834.
Okay,
so he precedes this peak, and at least in publications, there's very little usage of that particular term. And then in 1840, all of a sudden there's a peak. And that, one of the things that I was also looking at is, did that coincide with the rise in apocalypticism that occurred through, like the Seventh-day Adventist, the world is going to end, which was in the 1840s as well, or so that like was right at the beginning of that apocalyptic call, and wondering, kind of like 1981, is Jesus coming again? And
did you tell me that you interacted with Matthew Sutton on this? Have you
I
talked to him? Or?
not on this particular topic.
Okay, because I
Yeah.
thought I talked to somebody about him recently. He's a professor, was at Washington State, who's done
Right.
writing about end time stuff.
Yeah.
He's raised in the Four Square Church, by the way.
What's
As a
that?
kid. He grew up in the Four Square Church denomination.
Right. He and I talked, and we were talking mostly about Amy Semple McPherson, and
That's right. Okay.
yeah, more along the lines of people who were influential. Sharp guy, and so many I'm not scholarly enough to say I don't know something.
Exactly.
I'll say, well, I think it might be like this. I love the real academics just go, well, here's what I know, and here's what I'm pretty sure about. And no, I don't know about that question. And I'm thinking, but it's so closely related.
Yeah, can it be true? Here's another thing academics like to say. They'll say things like, we have found, like, and you just shut up then. Like when we have found something, it's like, there's a whole bunch of you, like these other smart people.
Right. So Jason Coker says, Jim Henderson, haven't seen that guy in a long time.
Well, sorry, Jason. How you doing? Where did we meet?
So here we have some sense of like a beginning of an initiation of some interest in that term. We know where that comes from and then it like in publication, it really drops for a long time and starts to come back up again at the beginning of the 20th century. And interesting really starts shooting upward, probably with the publication of books shooting upward. But there's a real leap from the 70s until now. And then about 2010 through 2012, it like drops off again and comes down. So the usage of that term. And it's hard to find who makes it popular, but what is it, kind of the cultural dynamics, your concern about the use of this phrase, how people perceive it, and what it does. I know you've mentioned it seems to actually be like counterintuitively. It almost you feel it works against what it's asking us to do,
without a doubt.
And
I think it's dying.
How's that?
It's dying its own death is evidence.
Right.
It's losing momentum.
So how is the term the Great Commission part of that losing momentum of evangelism?
Because Christians have been taught to be addicted to drama and allergic to the ordinary. So we have been fed a diet of drama.
Right.
People that have the most dramatic stories get the largest microphones, biggest spotlights.
Right.
We share their stories either in books, on cassette tapes that we used to do, or on videos, on social media now. The more drama, and we treat it like it's the norm. So it's a marketing play that is it's unbecoming to disciples that we're actually suckers for this, like everybody else. But it is. I'm not mad at people. I just think it's unfortunate that we've not been transformed, by the renewing of our mind, but we've been, conformed to the world in terms of becoming consumers for drama. So when you the language, so all that to say, these overarching narratives, Phil, that we inherit, like, let's talk about America as the best country in the world. So, I am generally walking around thinking this in my head. Like, I've traveled some and I come back and I'm glad I'm here. But honest to God, how do we know that that's not even possibly true? There's so many other countries that are more interesting that it depends on what you mean by the best, right?
Right.
And seriously, we are contenders right now for like the worst, like we have a lot of bad ideas rolling around, right? So, but that's a narrative and we grow up with that. It's kind of like, and it colors our view. Like if I go to another country, I think, hey, I'm from the best country in the world. It's all running in the background, this manifest destiny thing. So so as it relates to the church, and particularly around evangelism, which is a particular interest to me, for 100 reasons, but it's running in the background. Great Commission, and then you parade people across the stage from different countries, and the people we celebrate, they sacrificed, they gave up their job at the post office and went and worked in Mozambique for 25 years and lived in a jungle, with a large TV. And so we have a hero worship around all of it. All of
Right.
that makes it the other. It's like me watching an NFL game. Like I can virtually, vicariously feel like throwing the ball down, throw that ball down in the end zone, or throw it up in the stands or do something bizarre.
Right.
I'm vicariously entering into that experience with that hero. I'm nowhere, there's zero chance I would ever be able to have the energy to spike a ball in the end zone, And so particularly
It's getting to the end zone.
It just supports more the narrative itself, the language itself supports narrative hero worship. And then
right.
hero, if I can't be a hero, I don't count. Okay. So what I do is I subsidize the heroes. I underwrite the heroic stories. I pass the heroic stories around.
Right.
I'm not a hero, so I'm out. So if you think of spiritual discipline, evangelism is, most Christians would say praying, reading the Bible are like part of their spiritual disciplines. It's what they do. They may differ on how they do it, but everybody goes like, oh, I get it. Okay, yeah. Nobody counts evangelism in that mix. It's not a spiritual practice because It's not for me. Prayers for me, reading the Bible's for me, going to church for me, giving money's for me. Telling other people, connecting other people with God, that's for them. That's what's principally wrong and why it's dying. And
Right.
Celebrating the death of that language.
Right.
It's actually demotivated more people than it's motivated. We know that simply by the statistics around evangelism among Christians. It's a 1-week program once a year.
Yeah.
And they get it over with, give somebody a bunch of money, they're done. And the problem with that is not that I'm worried about people going to hell, which is another issue that we can talk about. I'm concerned that Christians aren't going to live in heaven right now. They can't get into the kingdom because they're not enjoying the fullness of life to be able to actually engage with the other.
Right.
How do you live life spiritually, Phil, without engaging with the other, and without telling them the truth about yourself, which is you're a follower of Jesus? How do you stay alive?
Right. So in a sense, it's emblematic of a general problem within Christianity that we are living it as a spectator sport. Yep. That we pay the entry fee to go to the game to watch somebody to be that hero for us, and on the sidelines we pray or maybe talk about them, maybe invite people to come in, the Billy Graham style of evangelism, which, quite frankly, I think Billy Graham was a pretty great guy. Yep. But they did discover that he discovered this, as well as other people who were studying it during the church growth movement. They discovered that the responses were really minimal compared to the number of people who would come forward for an altar call or say a prayer. And actually then going to a church was in single digits or less in the percentage of those who had responded, and then how churches would grow. And then as they studying church growth, it was Wynne and Charles Arnn looked into the statistics of people. How did you get to church? What brought you here? Was it a Billy Graham crusade? Was it and it was friends and family.
Yep.
And again, single digits went to a crusade, and then it was like 3% maybe.
So Phil, why did Billy Graham keep going, and why did we support that financially? What's your theory? Yeah. Why did all that keep going? Let's get Billy Graham. I'm not Billy Graham. I'm not having huge momentum success. It'd be hard to give up stadiums of 50,000 people letting you talk to them about Jesus.
Right.
Watching a few thousand come forward. It would be really tough. But what if you actually knew at some point we're not reaching our goal? Okay.
Right.
How do you sustain that? then why do churches keep doing this? Do you have any insights into that?
Once you get a business rolling and it's profitable and you have people working for you, even if you're not looking to make a lot of money, well, you got to keep them in a job. And if people are excited about it, you have a following, and then to change it seems to be, there's all kinds of dynamics that are culturally relevant to it. Then there's the corporation that is
all that. I appreciate all that. However, and not to sound super spiritual at all, but
right.
I did not sign up for this thing for that reason.
No.
I mean, clearly 1,000%.
Right.
We did not come into it for a job or job security. Nobody should be following Jesus, right? And so,
right.
So we have every right to turn the flashlight on ourselves and other people saying, really sorry, you got a bunch of money, you're about to lose it. But is that what we're supposed to be doing? There's not a hint in the Bible of what you just described as being in the mind of Jesus.
No.
Also,
or
Jesus
Paul.
left early.
Yeah.
Jesus left early. Here's a couple of things people should ponder. Jesus and God had this big plan, Jesus, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that, go to earth, save everybody and everything. Oh, and you're going to be there about 33 and a half years, depending upon how you count, and a Jewish calendar, or whatever. And so, and oh, by the way, the first 30 years, don't do anything. Okay. Don't do anything.
Yeah.
There's nothing to write about unless Christian fiction writers come up with it later. However, when you do get busy, you're going to work for about 3 years and then you're out of here. So leave early. Don't start too soon and leave early. That's what leadership looks like.
Yeah. Wow. And he did a pretty amazing job of it. So what I want to do, we've got a little pile of questions here that have popped up. So last week I did a podcast with Lazarus Bell, Sean Welch. I sent you his paper on pragmatism and evangelism.
I love that paper.
Okay, yeah. So he has a question, and he'll be glad to hear that. So Lazarus,
I read it
about you now.
Apologies, but generally I was liking the thoughtfulness and the seriousness of it. So
that's why I read the paper and I was automatically, I got to talk to this guy. So here's his question: is there a relationship between an increase in Great Commission theology and an expectation of the end times? I.e., the end is coming, and we need to save as many people as possible.
I'm gonna leave that up to you. You're the man. You're the
traditionally these things have been connected together, and a lot of it is because preach the gospel to all the nations, and then the end shall come. Right. Right. We have that verse, and it's been used oftentimes in the peak time in the peak seasons of evangelistic fervor happened during apocalyptic annunciation. You had Calvary Chapel in the late 70s and 80s with the coming of Hal Lindsey's proclamation, and Chuck Smith was on that completely. I was sitting in Calvary Chapel in 1981, hearing Chuck Smith say, today is the year. Then he kind of give it a caveat that, we don't know for sure, but everybody was behind. 1981 was the year that Jesus was going to rapture the church away. And the fervor of evangelism in Calvary Chapel during those times was dramatic, and it was often based around Jesus is coming.
Okay, let me comment on it then as a participant in this.
Yeah.
I preceded you by about 10 years in this because I knew nothing about Christianity and I became a Christian in 68, end of 68.
Right.
And during that time, almost immediately was exposed to Hal Lindsey, so much so that I'd never done this, listened to his tapes for hours. And then keep in mind, I have no future. I have no plans to go to college. None of that's going on in my mind. I'm a musician, and all that gets taken away because I get saved. And this has preceded Bono, so we didn't know Christians could actually have hair and sing and be rock stars. We didn't know that then, but apparently it's okay now. So then I had to give all that up. Consequently, the only thing to do is go out and get people saved. So as a practical matter, I believed, I couldn't have seen, if you had told me 1975, I thought, no, world's done by 75, 100%.
Right.
100%. And because I was being fed this indirectly. So remember when, sorry for the name check here. Let me, who can I call but Hitler? But so Hitler, there's no record of him saying, go out and kill the Jews. He just leaked it constantly and created systems that created the other people to do it. And no offense to those who may have been, Trump was a master at this, of leaking information, because basically mafiosos do this kind of stuff. They leak their intentions to other people, and so it gets acted on. So people like me, just floating out there, a new kid, new Christian, I think, well, the world's going to end. Everybody kind of get that vibe. Hal Lindsey said so, And what do I know? So let's go.
And he's still saying so.
All we did was try and get people saved. That's all we did. Nothing else.
Yeah.
I mean, I just took a job, washing dishes long enough to keep. So I had no future, nothing. And I was just like, I'm a really dedicated one. And the people that got points were the people that went out and tried that. And of course, there's people that were crazier than us, but we were like representative of what you're just, we're products of it. So the answer, yes, the further, but it's a sugar high. It's a sugar high, because some of them, they're going out and leading people to Christ with me. They're atheists now.
I know. The world didn't end. Well, let's just have fun in it. Right. So, I historically though, it precedes that by a lot. You had the growth of Seventh-day Adventism in the 1840s, and that's been documented through things like the cognitive dissonance studies, through Leon Festinger in the 50s. He was studying a flying saucer cult, and he was saying they were getting very evangelistic about what they believed in, because they believed the spacemen, as they called them then, were going to come and get them in 1953, I think it was, in Chicago.
Out of California that had a following, and they put up billboard signs. These are people who are very...
Oh, yeah. So that was the guy, Harold Camping, who had the big radio,
they really mean it,
Christian radio program. And he spent most of his money, sold a lot of his stations to put those billboards out there. And we had a billboard, a roadside full billboard in Salem, Massachusetts in 2011, declaring that the end was coming on May 21st. And somewhere I still have a sign that a friend of mine picked up. We threw a left behind party the day after. For all of us who would be left behind. It hit the papers in Salem. They thought, this is great. And then the Jehovah Witnesses, 1914, the end of the world. And we're very evangelistic about it. But here's an interesting thing. Their evangelism increased after they were proved to be wrong. They kind of redefined the parameters of their prophecy, and evangelism increased. And that's actually where the whole idea of cognitive dissonance comes from. Your declaration is disconfirmed publicly, and then you still hold on to it, and you get more evangelistic about what you believe.
Like one of my favorite books is called Being Wrong by Catherine Schultz.
Right.
Being wrong. It's a study of how human beings have a much higher propensity of wrongness and rightness, just statistically. And so in that theory, the idea comes up that when you're disproved, you double down. That's why cults double down. That's why that's why the idea of rational arguments, apologetics, in fact, to me are like, really, I'm sorry, people just double down as soon as you prove them, you won the argument. It's like, I don't care. You still, so that's why the work of how people change their minds is of great interest to me. How beings actually go about changing our minds. Right. Anyway, I'm with you on the apocalyptic connection to the Great Commission deal.
Yeah, and so Lazarus would probably already be seeing this through people like Jonathan Edwards, and even a little bit before him. So like Cotton Mather, the name from the Salem witch trials, was one of the most famous ministers in New England during that time. And he wrote a book called The Wonders of the Invisible World on the heels of the witchcraft trial. And when you read the beginning of it, it's like reading Hal Lindsey. He was already doing newspaper eschatology. What we see in the world is evidence that the end is coming based upon these small set of scriptures, right? And so that was happening in the 1690s, and it was happening in the 1740s. Jonathan Edwards was looking at a worldwide revival that would be coming through New England that then would bring about the end times. And that was during the First Great Awakening, right? So,
as far as I understand, Jonathan Edwards was quite the intellect.
Oh my gosh, he's absolutely brilliant. Yeah,
but he's making this worldwide revival connection in his mind.
Yeah. So it was interesting to me to see that Jonathan Edwards preceded Pentecostalism with believing in like prophetic, an occasional prophetic announcement that somebody would make that God was going to move and the end would come then. And they had what we're returning to now. We used to have, back when you and I were first Christians, it was pre-tribulational theology that, we gotta get people saved because the end is coming and Jesus is going to take us away. Right. But today we've switched over to post-millennial theology in most Pentecostal and charismatic churches, or at least the popular charismatic churches. Your Redding, California, and your Kansas City Fellowship, and those. What is it? IHOP now. They have a post-millennial theology that our bringing the gospel ushers in the return of Jesus Christ as we take over the world, right? More of a Wesleyan eschatology. And so that's where Edwards was coming from. That's where Finney was coming from. They all had that similar view. So I got some other things here. John Moorhead wants to know how we achieve balance in discipleship when evangelism has become the major focus, overshadowing other things like love of neighbor in other ways.
Shout out. I don't know if John and I have ever met in person, but we've interacted online, and also I've read some of his writings, and I think highly of John Moorhead. I'm honored that he would even ask a question.
He's a fellow troublemaker.
Okay, so interpret to me what you think John's asking. What's he asking us about here?
How do we achieve a balance in discipleship when evangelism is big? So as I see it, and knowing John, and he and I talk regularly, I think he's poking at the altar call, sinner's prayer. It's important that we get somebody in versus walking with them through life. Yeah. Yeah.
I wrote a book. I've written a couple of books about my experience with an atheist named Matt Casper. One was called Jim and Casper Go to Church. And then that was basically Matt and I writing reviews, church reviews, like theater reviews. And it was fun, and it was thoughtful, and it's how Matt and I met. And then we proceeded to have a friendship, but I failed to convert Matt. And
right.
We never had the drama story about Matt became a Christian through Jim's, incredible influence, and the Holy Spirit did this and that, none of that. And so,
what's wrong with you, man?
I wanted to answer that question, and in answering it, I wanted to answer what's wrong with all of us, because the fact is, so the next book was called Saving Casper. Basically, it's about what do you do when somebody says no, which is what's happening to the preponderance of Christians.
Yeah,
they're either saying no by they're absenting themselves, or they're saying no overtly, and now you're in this awkward. And it's also why Christians don't even get started with their non-Christian friends, because they don't want to hear no. And so then the Christians end up hiding who they are, and what they believe and what they think.
Right.
So none of this is very healthy. If you're a fan of a guy named Edwin Friedman, who I am, a must-read book, my leadership Bible is called A Failure of Nerve by Edwin Friedman. A Failure of Nerve by Edwin
Failure
Friedman.
of Nerve.
And Edwin Friedman, not a Christian, so let's just get that off the table first. He's a Jewish, now deceased rabbi therapist who borrowed from the Bowen theory of therapeutic theory of, it's called self-differentiation. Bowen is a guy that came up with the terms about reactivity, self-differentiation, non-reactivity, so on. It's used in context of counseling people. But Friedman borrowed it and applied it to organizations, specifically to churches and synagogues. And Friedman said that the primary mark of a leader is someone who can define themselves and still stay connected. So you define yourself and stay connected. It means Martin Luther King standing up and saying, I have a dream, and then helping LBJ sign inadequate legislation, but at least it was got the ball down the road. Right. So Martin Luther King was an example of somebody who said who they were, I have a dream, but then they also were able to compromise and make deals with the existing context. This is not the work an idealist wants to do, an ideologue wants to do. It's the work of another kind of internal discipline you have to practice. All that to say, I have no idea why I'm going down this road, but but I love talking about this.
So we were on that point of discipleship versus evangelism.
Yeah.
Which I'm going to make I want to make a step back for a second here, because Lazarus Bell recommends a book, Frank Kermode's Sense of an Ending, for those interested in how a disconfirmed prophecy can redouble itself.
And that's a beautiful. Thank you so much, Lazarus. These books about these thoughtfulness books about how human beings, we actually work in a non-rational world, which is the world we possess we live in most of the time, are so helpful. The language is so helpful. That's why Being Wrong is good. Also, Terror in the Name of God, by a Yale, Harvard professor, Jessica, Terror in the Name of God, studying terrorists.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
About how and also this explains, by the way, why so many evangelicals will support someone like Trump, who is the antithesis of their stated goals.
Right.
And why they double down. So it's clearly not based on a rational argument, it's something else. And why, if you're attempting to change somebody's mind, you have to really think differently about how you're going to reapproach that person. So that's all very helpful.
Along these same lines, Jim Hogue was asking, how did making disciples become evangelism? Son's disciples. How did it come to that? That we were the Great Commission, as the term said, is go out and make disciples, right? And but then it becomes go out and get decisions.
It's a marketing. It's easier to raise money to go send somebody on a hero quest than just to ask people to go do some work with their friends. Disciple making is hard work. It takes time. I love Brian McLaren. He helped me so much 20 years ago when we first started talking about this. He said, evangelism needs to be more about the starting line than the finish line. We've created the evangelism as the finish line. They get saved. Okay, thank you. Let's go to the next one. Just the fact that I could say that and people know what I'm talking about is an embarrassment. That Christians, they think, well, yeah, right. Just then they kind of intuitively, well, that can't be right, but it is right. That's what we inherited. So what Brian was suggesting is, why don't we bring people to the starting line, which is very vague where that starting line starts, okay, with people. And also, don't rob yourself of the privilege of being able to engage with people who are curious about God. Don't steal that awesome experience where you get to be the person who hears the Holy Spirit say something to you in the moment that you read about in the Bible. If you never put yourself in a position to need to hear, you're not going to hear anything. Right?
Right.
There's no need to say anything because you're not doing anything. Don't put
Right.
yourself in an awkward position with somebody that asks a weird question or feel awkward. Like when, we love to talk about Jesus being with sinners and so on, but you know how bad that looked? I mean, like him hanging out. Like
I do.
Yeah, one of the principal critiques.
You do too. You and I have the newspaper articles to prove it. Who are you hanging out with?
It's like that's where the work. That's why Phil and I have fun at this. We're still alive. We're not going anywhere. Just get started, because we actually periodically put ourselves in awkward positions.
I guess it's awkward. I just think it's like fun. When I first started pastoring, I used to tell people, I want to make fun a theological word.
Exactly. Well, it's another word. Let's be real. It's a word for joy, right? It's a word for that sense of something like Ira Glass, the guy who has This American Life, has become a friend over the last 10 years because he did a story on me and I never let him get away. And so I asked him one time, and I was interviewing him. By the way, if you're interested in this kind of thing, not to promote myself, but if you go to YouTube and put in Jim Henderson, Ira Glass, there's a series of really interesting interviews, short ones that I did with him.
They're really good. Yeah.
I said to him one time, how do you come up with these story things? Think about every week after week, they have to come up with these killer ideas.
Right.
And I'm waiting for some big insight, and he said, well, we just do what amuses us.
That's kind of how I work. What amuses him apparently amuses a whole lot more people than what amuses me.
I'm going to start a business that I just amuses me, which I've done now. But it's like, so it's like joy. What do we get joy out of? Trying to find Jesus in these weird locations, and engage with him and meet people and try and, this is a mystery. We're in a big mystery and we're trying to figure it out. Anyway.
Yeah. So another friend of mine in the UK, you absolutely would love her, and I think you need to meet her sometime. So Diana Greenfield, she is the I refer to her as the goth vicar of Glastonbury.
Whoa!
She lives in the town of Glastonbury. She's works as a pioneer pastor in the Anglican Church, and I don't know exactly. She always has to remind me what the title really is. But so anyway, Diana's the goth vicar of Glastonbury.
The title itself is impressive.
Oh, yeah. So she says this. I wonder whether we're still falling into the trap of handing out golden tickets to heaven without teaching people how to get on the train.
I like that. See, I think discipleship, I think conversion starts before, way before. The idea of being converted, you start discipling people and then they get converted. Somewhere in their heart on the way, it dawns on them, I think I believe this, or I want to believe it, or how do I do this? They ask you a question, but all this starts relationally with people by just being in their lives, being proximate enough.
Right.
They can at least know you're a human being. You care about them. And you can only care about so many people. So unless you're Billy Graham and can attract big crowds, just stick with 3 to 5 people, that you're working on. That's it. Instead of going to all the world, it should say go into your world. And I'm sure it says that in the Greek somewhere.
My fellow compatriot in troublemaking, particularly places like Burning Man, Jim Hogue, hanging out. That's what I do. Somebody said to me, I don't know how to make a disciple. I replied, do you know how to make friends?
Exactly.
Yeah. That.
Right.
Boy, we could really simplify it, couldn't we?
Well, plus have fun in the meantime, in the way there, right, Phil?
Yeah.
If think of all the people you've met just because you asked a couple questions. This is the work I'm doing now in 3 practices is basically teaching people how to be unusually interested in others, stay in the room with difference, stop comparing their best with their worst. I mean, it all starts with being unusually interested in others, which principally means learning how not to talk, right?
Yeah.
And so when I was doing when I was attempting to help Christians evangelize, which I kind of stopped doing because I don't have time. But but when I was doing that, I said, look, at your assignment now is to go out and not talk. What I want you to do is I want you to notice people. Just go out, go into the store and walk around and say, who do you see? Do you see the mom? You see the single mom? You see the person? You see the immigrant? Who do you see? Come back and then tell me who you saw. You are not allowed to talk. You get points off for talking, right? You can pray behind people's back if you want to, but you cannot say anything to them. Come back and tell me who you saw. The first act is that we see people. Jesus saw people.
Right.
That's how he knew he could choose. I'm going to go see that person. I'm going to go not that person. I don't know. That's what we do. So noticing people is the first act.
Yeah. So I remember quite early becoming a Christian. This is 1980, and I'm 21 years old, and
young man.
I know, just a young whippersnapper, and automatically being just really excited about Jesus, and without knowing that I was supposed to go out and do the Great Commission, I was just like excited about Jesus. So I was kind of obnoxiously excited about Jesus. Going to music school at the time. And a group of friends actually had been speaking to me.
Where'd you go to music school?
This was in Palomar College in San Marcos, California.
You're studying music?
Yeah.
Studying guitar or studying music theory?
Yes.
Both?
Yeah.
And it was a guitar the instrument you studied music theory on?
Boy, was that complicated, because I had played woodwinds as a kid.
Okay.
And I took a break from that because I was a water polo player and swimmer. Came back to music and said to myself, I really want to play the guitar, and signed up for music school. So I had been playing the guitar for months when I was in college for guitar, and
that would be complicated.
So I was playing 6 to 8 hours a day.
You also could read music though,
See, I could read music.
Understand the basics. Okay, good. Anyway,
so I was ahead of a lot of people who couldn't read music. Yeah.
Okay.
But I was way behind on things like jamming and ear training stuff. All those dynamics that come with music school. Yeah. But so now I'm all excited about Jesus, being kind of obnoxious about it. But I learned very early, and this was probably because I got involved with a group of guys who at the time were part of what they called the counter-cult movement. They were ministering primarily to Mormons, but then there was also Jehovah's Witnesses and New Age groups and whatnot.
The guy's name that ran that on the radio? Anyway, I used to listen to him.
Yeah, kind of, it was all the Walter Martin kind of stuff.
Walter Martin's people, right?
Yeah, the Bible Answer Man, Walter Martin. But then there was ex-Mormons for Jesus and Saints Alive groups. Ed Decker was part of that. So so I knew a lot of these people, and so within a year I was like teaching how to relate to Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses in churches. Right. I'd been a Christian about a year, and I was just excited about Jesus. But I learned very early, because I just really enjoy learning about people. I guess I'm kind of at heart an amateur anthropologist who wants to know about other people's cultures, right? Yeah. So I remember very early telling people, look, if you want to actually speak to people and have them listen to you, listen to them first. And I would kind of, in typical evangelistic terms, communicate it in a very, almost capitalistic way. Listen, if they tell you what they believe and they preach to you, they owe you one.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And for me, I was excited on both ends of it. I was excited to listen to them, and I was excited to then speak back. And also it gave me the ability not to give all the pat answers,
Yeah.
because they don't necessarily have the pat responses to everything they believe. Not every Mormon's going to talk the same. And, so yeah, it was more of a developing friends kind of thing that was going on.
A thing that might help people capture what you just said was people listen to people who listen. Okay?
Yeah.
People listen to people who listen. And
Yeah.
the other advantage you had by listening was they were human beings are attention junkies. If you give them attention, they'll take it almost every time. And it's really easy to divert people back to talking about themselves if you know how to do it and you're intentionally, and it's a spiritual practice, right? And so you were gathering information all the time from this person about what you thought mattered to Mormons. Turns out the guy just wants a girlfriend,
Right. And they're good at missionary dating.
Totally.
The Mormons have that one down.
Yeah.
So my friend, the Goth Vicar of Glastonbury, I'm still going to call her that, but she is officially, and this title's just as cool, the Avalon Pioneer Minister. I mean, Avalon? Come on now. This is mystical stuff, man.
We shouldn't even we shouldn't call ourselves Mr. Like Avalon.
Yeah.
Like Frankie Avalon? No, I'm just messing with you.
Yeah.
Very impressive.
Yeah. You got to come to the UK and hang out sometime. You'd love it. So Lazarus throws in another big question here. What's the ethical difference / complication between focusing on evangelism, the local, before or in preference to the global? So
ethical.
Is there an ethical complication with focusing on evangelism locally
versus
in preference to globally?
Well, it would be an ethical dilemma if your theology gave primacy to to urgency. If urgency is at the center of your theology, then you better go global as fast as possible.
Right.
Okay. And but the problem with that particular, as it relates to evangelism, and I'm sure Lazarus always knows all this stuff, but what fascinated me was looking at the life of Jesus was given the scope of his mission, and the way we would have understood it, he was rather non-urgent about the whole thing. Like the first 30 years, do nothing. Okay. Then the next few years, wander around, kill a lot of time walking. If you could walk on water once, would you not do it twice? Okay. Just saying, it's not a very efficient.
Take a tour and people can follow you around the lake.
Like Jesus, I think Jesus was.
Hey guys.
Jesus most of the time rode, was in the boat, and he rode. That's what I think. That's a theory.
Yeah.
Nobody can disprove it. But clearly, he was not efficient or operating urgently. What about Persia? What about Egypt? What about all the people that were alive at that time that he apparently, according to that theory, just let go to hell as rapidly as possible? Okay. Nobody ever brings this up. I know that. I know I'm not supposed to ask this question, but a person might ask this. Certainly, non-Christians ask this question every day. So if you want to have a conversation with them, you might be prepared to hear that question, because it does go to the issue, in my opinion, of where the urgency is. So the only place that evangelism is real, in my opinion, if it is like prayer, and it is to be a spiritual practice, is locally. It is
right.
Now, there are people who are more gifted than others who are going to get up and make a big deal and have big churches and have big meetings, and but those people are like, the 1/10 of 1%. Like wealthy people are. They're just out there, and we go like, oh yeah, and so we give them a better tax advantage. They get more press. So to me, the preference always goes to local, but that presupposes we have a methodology to give people with which they will engage. Prayer used to be, if you didn't pray 60 minutes a day in your closet, it didn't count. Now, from what I can tell, you can have a yoga tape on and have some music in the background for 30 seconds and it counts. I don't know what happened, but everybody changed their minds. It's kind of like
Right. Yeah.
divorce used to be a no-no. Now, like, gay,
Right.
now it's gay people. Anyway, we keep changing our minds about which sins and which problems are real problems. Sorry to.
Yeah. We do seem to have a real switch in emphasis on prayer. Not that the prayer ministry groups aren't still around. You got your 724 evangelism group that
Yep.
will go do 7 days of 24-hour prayer and send people out to go evangelizing in the place where they're having their their burn, they call it.
Yep.
And a variety of prayer ministries. There's some people I absolutely love who are
Yep.
following what I'm doing and saying we're praying for you, and I cherish that.
Yep.
What's going on. But on the other hand, in terms of like the local church and the emphasis on prayer, it doesn't seem to be what it was.
Well, while I find that topic interesting, I'm just playing off that as it relates to evangelism. And if we're going to get into the imaginations of ordinary Christians,
right,
we're going to have to find another way to engage them other than what we've inherited.
right.
Well, that's all we're talking about.
Yeah, and for me, I suppose the tension that Sean Lazarus is asking about here between the local and the global. If you go back to something like the Lausanne Conference, 1974, it's Billy Graham who kicks it off, inviting a whole bunch of people around the world to say, how do we get evangelism around the globe? And it had very much of an end time connotation to it, as they were looking at global evangelization. But the emphasis, even though they invited, quote, the movers and shakers, right, to the meeting and the thinkers, there was still a very strong emphasis on the average Christian being a witness.
Yes.
And so at least theoretically, yes, even though it hasn't practically worked out that way for the most part, theoretically, behind the idea of this global evangelization, this Great Commission, the idea was that everybody participated because they recognized the dynamics. If we could go local everywhere, that would do far more than a bunch of big name guys standing in stadiums.
But what's interesting is, as it turns out, that's not how change occurs. The each one reach one theory,
right?
So awesome on paper. Unfortunately, it doesn't play out that way. It plays out. There's a great book by James Davison Hunter. Have you read this book, To Change the World?
No.
You should read this book, Phil, To Change the World by James Davison Hunter. And the way change occurs is through influencers. And so this,
right.
So the problem is that there's got to be systemic change that occurs. So what I would suggest, and this is kind of above my pay grade when I'm talking about here, but that's never stopped me so far. It has something to do with the way the basic story in To Change the World is that change occurs when cultural elites who are not at the very top begin to exercise influence. Ideas emerge from the bottom up, like artists. Ideas emerge from the bottom up. So, like you and I would be in that category, generally speaking.
Now, let me guess who that is.
This is Phil Wyman,
and
we're on a live podcast. I'm sorry.
Hello.
Isn't it great? So we have an idea, and then we try and get percolated out, and then somebody else comes along and says, "Oh, that's a good idea." that's more famous, has more influence than us.
Right.
We take it to market, right? Because distribution trumps ideas. So, for example, Wilberforce took the idea of a group called the Clapham sect, who were a group of Anglicans, dissatisfied Anglicans who had some kind of experience with God, but these people were from what we would call middle to upper middle class families, but they, in their mind, wanted to merge public and personal piety. And so they began to advocate that we need to do end the slave trade. They had no clout in Parliament. Wilberforce is the one that took it to Parliament. And so that's how change actually occurred in England and then ultimately in the United States.
Right.
So somewhere along the line, it isn't this equal kind of clean thing of like, I go reach so many people and you do. It's more complex than that. It's more it's more organic than that.
Right.
So
so in some sense, Jonathan Edwards, Charles Finney, Amy Semple McPherson had it right.
Yes, they had it right. They were in the right place. Now, whether they had it right, Bono is another example of someone who many people think of or know as a Christian, and he picks and chooses when he exposes that part because he understands the public marketplace. But he would be a person that has generally warmed people up of his generation to like, well, they can't all be bad, right? That would be what he's done, right? So I would say but sometimes we're working on the wrong theories. So yes, you can be at the right place, you can be the right person, but you're working on the wrong theory. And so the problem is that today power is getting more diffuse. I know that people are trying to glom onto it, but it's getting more diffused as communication broadens, so people can talk with each other. Like you can talk to me. I know you know John Moorhead, you know Lazarus, you know the Avalon and UK, and maybe I'll meet them, and sometimes I talk to them online. And like even if you and I were out of the picture, they could talk to each other. So it's getting harder to control. As a result of that, people feel more empowered to have thoughts. I have one of these, so therefore I'm not stupid anymore. I just go to Google. Anyway, all that's going on, and that's the world we're actually living in. So me trying to consolidate power and attention to myself is not a very effective model anymore. Rather than experts, we need expertise, right? That's the world we're living in now. Rather than I'm an expert about this, no, what we're trying to figure out together is expertise. We're thinking together. That's the world we're in now. I may have influence, but I may be using it incorrectly. So,
right. So there was I don't even remember the comment you made, but it was a little as you were rambling through that, the influence, you made a comment about you reminded me of the reputation of the church. You were talking about Bono, and some people now can say, oh, maybe they're not all bad because he's a Christian, he's cool. And I find that the biggest part of what I do is just trying to make it okay to be a Christian again. That people can say, oh, well, he's a Christian pastor? Wow. Okay. Not all of them are so weird.
Do you think that counts as evangelism in your head? Does that count as evangelism?
For me, it absolutely does.
Why shouldn't that count for everybody? Why couldn't just individuals have people in their life that they had that same effect on? What if we said we happen to live in a time when the church has been so dominant in the imagination, and like in the last 4 years, we kind of screwed up the next 40. So
we were working on it way before that.
I know, but like we went now, we're like over the top. So in the next 4, what we could do is just help temper that a little bit. Like they're not all that way.
Right.
That's evangelism.
Yeah. For me, it's a solid part of evangelism. And if somebody wants to challenge me on it, I'll say, well, it's a pre-evangelism that's absolutely necessary before you can do evangelism. But for me,
I don't see any distinction like that.
No, I don't either. But within the evangelical church today, I can legitimately tell people, well, we got a long way before we can actually give people what you want to say about the gospel,
Well,
because they've heard it and it's been redefined in their ears by our own behaviors.
And I say to them, how's it going for you?
Yeah.
Maybe I suck. What do you got going? Maybe I'm just a lame compromise. Tell me how we got a lot of success stories going here. No. I'm so sorry.
Well, come on. How many people raise their hand in church today or said a sinner's prayer? And that was one of the challenges as a young pastor in the Foursquare Church, that every month I had to put on a monthly report how many people gave their life to Christ, how many people received the baptism with the Holy Spirit, how many people were water baptized. But these were, and how many recommitments. They don't do the recommitments anymore, but that was there. And so there was an assumption, it was an unspoken rule. Well, it was spoken, it was unwritten, that every message would have an altar call.
Right.
For salvation. That is really tough.
Yeah.
For a young pastor.
Horrible.
Yeah.
I was in Foursquare, but they were cleaning up for a while, and because they did, then they brought in the music, and Calvary did it, and I totally was a loser as a pastor trying to compete with those models.
Oh.
And it was so frustrating.
Me too. Well, not only that, I was pastoring in the early 80s, and those were the years when, the baby bell companies all started popping up, and you'd get these phone calls. It'd be like, "Hi, this is MCI. Do you have a long distance service?" And you're getting all these automated calls, and you pick up the phone. There's a hiss on the other side of the line. You know what it's going to be. Then there's a click open, and you hear a room full of people in the background, and somebody's about to say something, and you go, bam, and you slam down the phone. Man, I learned really early that as soon as you started to do like an altar call type of thing at the end of the message, it was the hiss on the line.
Yeah.
People, now, except for the people who were already Christians, but they felt like it was now the sales pitch comes at the end of the message. And so, if you haven't given your life to Jesus, but you would like to do so this morning with every head bowed and every eye closed, just lift your hand. We would do that kind of thing, right? Well, I don't think I ever did many of those, but that was what was expected.
People have no idea what it was like to go through that era feeling like a failure every Sunday.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then to have to go to pastors' meetings.
Exactly. Hey, I want to throw something out in case somebody knows. Getting back to the Great Commission, I believe and I told you this earlier, there's some indication that this phrase was used at what was called the Edinburgh Conference, and I want to say it was in the early 1900s.
Yes.
And I think John Mott was there.
About 1910, wasn't it?
Yes. But what's interesting is it was a very upbeat thing. Because this preceded World War I. Whatever was going on, the World War I had not happened yet. Okay, right. But just think about the logic of this. They were at a large conference, and so they had they broke, either people came to address a particular issue like evangelism, church. I don't know what they talked about those days,
Right.
Whatever they talked about. They had 5 different, and each of those were called a commission. And they either brought papers or they worked on papers over there. And then when they gathered them all, it was called the Great Commission. Oh. I happen to think that the language congealed with the language that was being bandied about by Hudson Taylor or William Carey or other people.
Right.
People that were more savvy marketers, like we would like, wait a minute, there's a thing there. They heard it. What if, wow, that's awesome. Friendship evangelism, or, each one reach one, or they saw the hooks.
Right.
Then it just floated. It floated along because it was attached to some sort of institutional thing. It really was not attached directly to evangelism, but the sound, it's so resonant, the Great Commission, it just sounds like, I have a big thing about the rhythm of language and how it feels in your mouth when you say it. And so I personally think if you're going to try and communicate an idea to people and you want them to adopt it, find a phrase that they can say easily
Right.
and repeat, and it has a certain feeling.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
having said that, I think it was picked up either somebody picked it up probably around the time prior to Billy Graham, and then it had its own gas on the fire. I think some people out of California picked up on this, some business guys personally, that were in the mix on the political evangelicals.
Right.
I don't know if it's the 30s or the 50s. Forgive my ignorance about all this. I'm just, pulling things out. And I think they captured it. And I think then Bill Bright and those people really took it to market.
Right.
When you start putting stuff on a website now, you print it, you reinforce it. Oh, Jim's are the 3 practices, or Jim's got off the map. We do that as a way of branding ourselves, so that it's easier to remember. I think that's where it came from.
Yeah.
So I think,
and Bill Bright's worth looking at because he was convinced by a corporate CEO that he needed a hook.
Yeah.
And at first he resisted it. Gospel's not for sale. And then he thought, well, this guy's really right. And he became one of the primary influences of the sinner's prayer, with his 4 spiritual laws.
The Navigators and several other groups. They actually created the distribution, right? This is why I say distribution. They distributed what we then associate with the Great Commission. So yes, in the middle 1800s to the 1900s, I'd say the Great Commission did connote in people's minds missionary activity. After that, I think it became secondary to people viewing churches used it to try and motivate and incentivize people in churches to go do something. And it was a mixed message of, if the church was dedicated to missions, let's raise a bunch of money and go do that,
Right.
To reach people, then it's kind of, here it is right here, folks.
And the guys running crusades would be able to raise money.
Yeah.
We're going to fulfill the Great Commission. It's a great task. We need a great amount of money.
So, those are my thoughts. But I am very curious about this. If somebody, grateful for anybody who's doing research that finds some threads of evidence of any of this, or another thread, I'm utterly fascinated, because I really think we need to change the narrative from the Great Commission to the Great Connection. My language probably isn't correct, but I think the shift that's going on in our lifetime is from John 3:16 to Matthew 25. And so there's a shift going on.
Now, when you say to Matthew 25,
the sheep
spell that
and
out.
Goats. I was in prison. You fed me. You visited me. You fed me. This is like so widely embraced now, even by evangelicals, who at one time said it can't mean, it can't mean people that are Christians. It means Christians, and I'm going to, not just everybody in the world. Whatever you did to the least of these must mean to Christians, right?
Right.
And of course, back that up by things Paul's written. But you have Jesus himself, talking this larger expanse of like, this is what's going to happen. And there was nothing mentioned about coming to faith, people, what their doctrine or beliefs. It was simply the actions. And whether you like this or not, this is how people presume to judge Christians. And I might add, in the earliest of early churches, in the first 150 years, it's how they judge if you're a Christian. Another great book is called The Patient Ferment of the Early Church. The patient ferment of the early church.
Yeah, wow.
It talks about how the church came out of North Africa. Another thing I'm sorry to inform you of, that Jesus was not white. And so the early church fathers were also not white.
Right.
Sorry about the complication that brings in your minds. But at any rate, all that to say that there was that the way you became a Christian then was slowly. You had to evidence by serving the poor, taking care of widows, and adjusting your personal lifestyle. And they'd let you come to church. I think that'd be an awesome thing to do.
So
they didn't have to evangelize. People watch their lives.
Right.
And they were doing hard things like taking care of dead people. Stuff nobody else would. Sorry for talking so much.
No. That's hot stuff. And we're gonna close out with that. And actually, I want to make a comment here. So DJ A friend of mine from Fat Stogie's Cigar Lounge here in Long Beach. That's where we hang out.
Thank you for being
here. Yeah. He makes a comment that is just, it's exactly the struggles that you and I feel about this issue of Great Commission and other Christian terminology. He says, every time I hear Great Commission, I think of a car salesman.
Of course, you should. They're the ones who make the guys on the stage. Like, really, you telling me Billy Graham couldn't have sold furniture? Come on.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Jim, how do people get hold of you?
Just go to 3practicecommons.com.
3Practice
you want to see the work
Commons?
Yeah. 3Practice Commons, or just go to 3practices.com.
Right.
Or 3practicecommons.com, and you'll get caught up in the world that I'm the project I'm on right now. We have this larger group called Off the Map, and we do 3 practices, and we do some version of leadership training, which we call co-conspirators, and then we put on live events where we do things called Hack the Ministry, and we do idea parties where we have people converge for a short period of time to have them learn from each other, like we're doing here with Phil.
All right. Hey. Okay. So this has been the Wild Theology podcast with my fellow conspirator in good crimes, Jim Henderson. And if you want to find out more about Wild Theology, you can go to patreon.com/Phil Wyman. You can help support it there. This will also be seen, if you only caught a part of it, you can catch it on YouTube or in places where you find podcasts. It's Wild Theology with Phil Wyman. And Jim, that was rocking.
Thank you.
I could do this stuff with you like for hours and hours, but
You gotta go.
Yeah, and we bore other people to death.